Hugh and I both are so pleased that President Spangler's here. He's our very dear friend, and I've had the happy association with him all during his distinguished presidency at Chapel Hill when he was resident there of the university in its entirety. So, Dick, grand to see you. Thank you for making the effort to be here tonight. Now, I'll tell you, working with Hugh Morton, you don't know what an experience that is. Here's a man who can move battleships. He can make Grandfather Mountain the greatest attraction in the world. He can stage productions to save the seafood industry. He can defy the federal government and build a viaduct around the mountain. But let me tell you, when it comes to getting him to put out a book, it's a war. But we just had a wonderful experience. He has, how many, 150,000 pictures up there in your house, Hugh? So can you imagine what we started with? So we all got together in the university press, and Hugh brought a whole bunch of pictures down, so we started sorting them out. And he kept saying, this book won't sell. It's never going to amount to anything. So we said, oh, you leave that to us. So finally we agreed on a certain number, 200 and so. About 4 days later, here came one of those envelopes, photo, please don't bend. There's a note in there from Hugh. I found one more. 2 weeks later, another big envelope, another note. I found two more. And finally, I said, Hugh, he was really terrified at the fact that the book wouldn't move. I said, Hugh, I'll tell you what. I'll walk backwards up Grandfather Mountain if that book doesn't sell 5,000 copies the first month. Well, he didn't want any cases of cardiac arrest going up Grandfather Mountain, so he went to work. 30,000 copies later, here we are. So that picture you're looking at now is one Hugh made a week ago of the Davie poplar in the very center of the campus. We wanted you to see that the old poplar's well, being cared for, beautiful fall color around it, but Hugh and I want to dispel one rumor right now. Neither he nor I helped General Davie plant that tree. All right, Hugh, you got the trigger. Let's go.
All right. Well, Bill, I don't know how many pictures of the old well I've got, but it's probably in the hundreds, but this is one of my favorites, and I thought we'd put that in there to let folks know we're putting on a Chapel Hill program, or at least a lot of pictures from Chapel Hill. And then this next one is the old, the bell tower. And I'm sorry I couldn't produce a full moon for you, but see there, that little moon, I really like the picture because of the tiny little moon there. Then we've got the one of Dr. Frank pitching horseshoes. I was a very timid, frightened freshman in the fall of 1939, and my grandfather, Hugh McCrae, wanted me to be sure and go by Sunday afternoon and see Dr. Frank Graham, his good friend, and I went to his open house, and he could tell right away that I was ill at ease. And he said, would you like to go pitch horseshoes? And I said, sure. And so we went out back, and I had my camera with me. And I asked him, could I take a picture? And he said, yes. Well, this picture made the cover of the Carolina magazine, and I was new around there. And immediately, I was invited to be on the staff of the Daily Tar Heel, the Buccaneer, the Carolina magazine, all of those things. And so that was my first picture, and that was 1939. How old does that make that picture? It makes it 60-some years old.
Don't count.
Anyway, Dr. Frank was a wonderful person, and I've got a lot of pictures of him. Here's another one. He was escorting Eleanor Roosevelt across the campus to luncheon at Carolina Inn, and on the right there is Lewis Harris. Well, he was a student leader when I was in school, but Then, as soon as he got out of school, he started the Lewis Harris Pole, and that was probably the most respected of the poles back in that day. Bill, you know a lot about Lou too, so you chime in anytime you want to.
He became a world figure, of course, but along with Doug, myself, Lou served on the night commission and did all the polling surveys about American attitudes toward college sports. He's quite a distinguished alumnus.
The next one, Bill, you want to tell?
You recognize that lighthouse? You want to know how to get seagulls to do that? Hugh gets a loaf of bread, stands upwind, and tosses it up in the air, and that's the picture you get right there.
That may be cheating a little bit, but I like the picture.
You cheat any time.
Now
Here's a picture. You see that bumper sticker? That was in the campaign, of course, to save the Hatteras Lighthouse. Well, after this picture was published, somebody went up to Governor Hunt and said, how often do you pose with Senator Helms for pictures like that? He said, how often do you move lighthouses?
We raised right away. They had a county chairman in every county of the state. We raised over $500,000 right away, and I think it extended the life of the lighthouse in its historic location for at least 15 years.
Yes.
Well, let's look at the next one. Here we have General Hugh Shelton. Of course, he was a North Carolinian, is a North Carolinian, and he was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And this picture was made down at the USS North Carolina at the 50th anniversary of World War II. But there were two people. You can see General Shelton in the background of the next picture, and there were two people sitting side by side in the foreground, and they looked like the very best of friends. I don't know whether you can recognize them or not, but I sent this picture to both of them, and I said, I hope this brings you as much pleasure as it does me. And both of them got back to me, wanted to know who they were. But that's Governor Hunt on the left and Jesse on the right.
You see, it took a general to get them back together again. Okay.
A lot of you may think that this is my favorite picture of the Charlotte skyline, and I like it. I'm glad I took it. But my favorite picture of the Charlotte skyline is this next one. If you look at it closely, in the top of the picture, you can see the Charlotte skyline, and this was made from a point right beside the mile-high swinging bridge on Grandfather Mountain. That's 87 air miles away, according to the airline charts, and that picture was made about 10 years ago. I've been wanting to get one recently because you built a lot of new skyscrapers down here, but the air pollution obstructs the view, and I've gotten pictures, but not this good, and I'm going to keep my eyes open, and hopefully I'll be able to show you an updated one with more skyscrapers pretty soon. Here we have on the left William Cecil, who owns Biltmore House, and then on the right Prince Charles, the Prince of Wales. Prince Charles had been active in historic structures over in England and came over to check on William to see whether he was doing a good job with Biltmore House. I want you to notice that where Prince Charles has his hand there. It was, I had been told that he didn't want any cameras there. Bill said, go on, bring yours. And so I got there, and I was the only person there with a camera. Well, the Cecils wanted their picture made with the Prince. Then I got this picture. Bill said, give me the camera, and I'll take a picture of you with the Prince, so he did. And later, there was another picture. There was a gentleman, good friend of mine, standing there when the prince was getting ready to leave, and I took a picture of him. But when I got home, every single one of those pictures, the prince had his hand in his jacket just like this. And I suppose that when you've been taught how to enter a ballroom since childhood and all the rest, this is the way you should be when you're having your picture made. It's supposed to look informal. So all you gentlemen take note. When you have your picture made from now on. But let me show you who the other person was. Right there.
Wait a minute, go back. There it is.
And you see where the prince's hand is. Well, what was really happening, the prince was getting ready to leave. He had to get to New York to make another speech. And President Spangler was nearby, and I said, Prince Charles, may I get your picture with the president of the university? He said, sure. But he was anxious for whoever it was going to pick him up to be there, and he was scowling. And I said, sir, would you smile? And Dick Spangler says right now that I'm the most brash person he knows to tell the next king of England to smile. But anyway, am I correct in what I'm saying, Mr. Spangler? Here we have Orton Plantation on the banks of the Cape Fear River, partway between Wilmington and Southport. And I think it's the most beautiful old southern mansion that I know about. And I've had a lot of pictures made down there. Here's a picture that I made probably 35 years ago at Tanglewood Park in Winston-Salem. And the state is still using it. I gave it to the travel and tourism people, and they still, you see it all along I-40 and the rest stops. But about 10 years ago, the 10 southern states decided to publish a brochure publicizing travel to the 10 southern states. And by accident, this picture got labeled Camden, South Carolina. Well, don't think that our crowd in Raleigh didn't razz the daylights out of their counterparts in Columbia for South Carolina being so short of scenic views that they had to swipe one from North Carolina. But anyway, now I know you can recognize some of these people here. That's Grady Cole on the left and Charles Crutchfield on the right, and this was the 25th anniversary of Grady's early morning pronouncements on WBT. But I had a good time that day. And here's the original Cracker Jacks. Left to right, Arthur Smith, Brother Ralph, Cloudy McLean, Sonny Smith, Tommy Fail, and Don Reno. But they were early morning favorites, not only here in Charlotte, but they were syndicated, everything from Dallas, Texas to Baltimore. And they were all very good friends of mine. I don't know whether it's rumor or fact that the way stock car racing, which is pretty big around here, got started was when Junior Johnson was running the back roads of Wilkes County, delivering moonshine whiskey to anxious customers. But anyway, if you go to a race or a car show and you can get a quart fruit jar with Junior Johnson's autograph on the lid, you've got a very valuable souvenir. And here's another one of the pretty good stock car races, Dale Earnhardt. Don Hunter, a photographer with the Charlotte Observer, took him up to the top of Grandfather Mountain to pose him for a poster, King of the Hill, back when Dale was winning all the races. And I took him out to the viaduct, and he said, boy, I'd love to run number 3 around those bank curves. And there's Humpy Wheeler, who, of course, is boss of the Speedway, and the local boy that made good, Governor Martin, and then Dale Earnhardt over there on the right. Back in the spring, Governor Easley gave Humpy and Jerry Richardson and me an award, and I have talked to Jerry Richardson and am very proud of him. I'm sorry that they're having trouble lately with all their injured players, but he is a really wonderful gentleman, and what he's done with his ball team has been a great thing for North Carolina and for Charlotte. Anyway, while I was sitting there at the table with him the day that I got my award, I said, Jerry, you may know or you may not know that your Black Panther logo and mascot is, there ain't no such thing. It's really a black leopard. But if you come up to Grandfather Mountain, I'll take a picture of you with a real honest-to-goodness panther. And he got excited and was up there the next week. And we've got 3 of them, and I picked the most docile one of the bunch. Bill, I didn't want any blood to be shed.
You notice that Jerry's eyes are open.
This is a young one that we got a year ago, and now he's grown and in with the others. But when a little panther, cougar, mountain lion, it's all the same animal, we're trying to get our people at Grandfather Mountain to say panther now instead of cougar or mountain lion in honor of the ball team down here. But anyway, when they're that age, notice that their eyes are Carolina blue. And later they change color. This picture was taken the day before we had our first hurricane, our first of 3 hurricanes in the mountains. In other words, we had beautiful fall color. And then hurricane after hurricane, and it took more and more of the color off at our elevation. There's still some pretty color. I drove through Morganton today, and it's real pretty down there right now. But anyway, I just want you to know that we did have some fall color this year. Here we have Julian Shear, who used to write for the Charlotte News before it merged with the Charlotte Observer. And he and I were covering Hurricane Hazel when it arrived at full moon, high tide. The eye of the hurricane came ashore at Carolina Beach. Some of you insurance folks that are here today, you know that your insurance doesn't cover rising water, but it does cover fire. And how that house caught on fire, I've never understood that, but anyway, just a couple of years later, Julian Shear was head of public relations for NASA, and he was in charge of all the press arrangements for covering the shots to the moon and everything else. Bill, you know a little bit about the setup.
Yeah, your next slide will show.
Anyway, Julian invited me to go down to Alabama and take pictures of the rockets for him, and I had a real good time. I mean, I just couldn't believe how big they were when you got close to them. But that's a picture that I took for Julian back in that day. But Mr. Webb was from here in North Carolina, and
Julian,
who else?
George Simpson was his press man. All 3 were Carolina graduates.
Yeah.
The head of the NASA, Julian and George, all 3.
Yeah. I know that most of you probably been to the State Zoo in Asheboro, and I don't think there's a finer zoo exhibit in our country than the polar bear exhibit at Asheboro. And that little girl there, she was pretty excited when the polar bear did a U-turn right in front of her.
Okay. Can you guess who that is on the right? Andy Griffith, that's right. And that's Lillian Prince, William Meade Prince's lady, who played Queen Elizabeth. You remember Bill wrote the book, The Southern Part of Heaven. I was talking with Andy last week, and all is well, and he sends you greeting. But that's when he first got started playing Sir Walter Raleigh.
He's given Queen Elizabeth tobacco leaves that his colonists brought back from the New World. Okay.
We put this picture in here for all the old folks in the group, starting with us. Bob House, Margaret Rose Sanford. That was at an occasion, the Carolina Inn, where we were honoring Margaret Rose and Terry, and the Chancellor decided we had to have a little music, so there it is.
Every time Chancellor House showed up, he said, well, I brought my notes along, and so he started playing Oh Susanna. And
He's quite a legend. This picture Hugh made at the Smith Reynolds Airport in Winston-Salem. Gordon Gray was a very close friend of Harry Truman's, and he persuaded Mr. Truman to come down that day, and that was when we broke ground for Wake Forest University in Winston-Salem. That's a very historic picture.
Well, I won't tell the long story about this, but Frank Jones from the Winston-Salem Journal was there too, and well, I'll
Go ahead and tell that story. It's a great one.
Frank Jones was a real card. I know that some of you think that Jake Houston, who was the original photographer over here for the Shaw Observer, probably was a bigger character, but Frank Jones, you couldn't tell what he would do next, but he noticed that the propeller from Mr. Truman's plane had messed up his hair a little bit, so Frank pulled out a pocket comb and said, here, Mr. Truman, you comb your hair. Mr. Truman combed his hair, handed the comb back to Frank. Frank wiped it off on his leg, stuck it in his pocket, and went on back to the newspaper. There's one of my very good friends on the left there, a childhood picture of him. This was made in 1962 at University Day in Keenan Stadium at Chapel Hill. And President Kennedy, of course, was the main speaker for University Day, and Dr. Friday had learned from the Secret Service that there wouldn't be but about 10,000 people there. And of course, Keenan Stadium at that time held 30,000. Well, Bill called every school principal for miles around and said, this may be the only opportunity that your children are going to have to see a president of the United States in person. You better get them over there. Well, every single seat in Keenan Stadium was filled. So that's the story on that one, unless you want to say more.
Oh, that was his. Scotty Reston told us a week later, said when they left Washington that morning, Mr. Kennedy was very grumpy, was in a very bad mood, and he got to Chapel Hill and had such a glorious experience. He went on down to Fort Bragg from Chapel Hill. They put on a firepower demonstration down there. He said by the time they got back to Washington, he was ready to run through a brick wall. He was so stimulated. Okay.
Well, they tell me that the state legislature doesn't honor anybody with a joint session of the General Assembly unless they're deceased, but they made an exception. They made an exception a little bit earlier this year, and I told Mark Bassenite, the head of the state senate, that I would like to take some pictures. And I thought I was going to be up in the balcony with my telephoto lens. He put me right down on the floor, right closer than some of the members of the General Assembly. But you see Governor Easley there clapping his hands, and Ida and Bill, but they paid him a very well-deserved tribute. And I understand it's the only time that anything like that's ever happened, but it's completely well-deserved. Here was another university day and a president. This was the 200th anniversary of our university, and President Clinton was the main speaker. And you see him there at the right, working on his, putting the finishing touches on his speech. And you also notice that he's grinning from ear to ear. Well, Charles Perrault is at the rostrum, and Charles was saying, "I am here to represent those who couldn't afford to go to Duke, and those who wouldn't have gone to Duke even if they could have."
This is another picture of Charles, and for all you Charlotteans, you recognize Lunas McGloin quickly. This was the very first performance of their wonderful video and CD that they have called North Carolina is My Home. If you don't own that, go buy one, because it's the most authentic representation of our state that anybody's ever put together. I commend it to you.
It certainly was, and all these people that have been in line to vote here lately or to get flu shots. Jim Babb and Arthur Smith and I stood in line for at least 2 hours just to go by the funeral home the night before Lunas was had his funeral, and Lunas was truly a very loved Charlottean.
Well, you know, I don't believe there's anybody that is more loved though than Charles was, Hugh. And I must share with you a little story. I got a call on that morning of the 4th of July at 6 a.m. and it was Charles's secretary calling, and she told me that he had died. I couldn't believe it. I was in such shock. And she said, "I called you because the last letter he wrote was directed to you. And in that letter, he asked me to help him find a cemetery plot." He said, "I'm not conscious of any presence of death, but he said, I think I better start thinking about this." Well, I took that entire 4th of July day, and Charles is in the old Chapel Hill Cemetery where he wanted to be. But nobody loved the University of North Carolina more than did he, and no figure in public life that I know was loved by more people than Charles was. Wonderful person.
Charles's main fun in life was poking fun at our friends down the road at Duke, and he spoke at Julia's and my 50th wedding anniversary over at the Alumni Center in Chapel Hill.
That's right.
And he said, of course, there was no Duke the first 150 years of Carolina, but if there hadn't been one, we would have had to invent one, because we needed a place to send Richard Nixon to study constitutional law.
Okay.
I'd give anything for this gentleman to have seen the Red Sox win the World Series here, but this is Ted Williams. And of course, all of you know that he was one of the great hitters of all time, but as far as I'm concerned, he's the best fisherman I ever saw. He could make a cast and said, "No, I wouldn't get anything there." Next cast, the fly would barely touch the water, and he'd say, "We'll get a good one," and he'd haul it in. The guy thought like a fish, but anyway, he got his love for North Carolina when he was at pre-flight school during World War II, the Navy pre-flight school at Chapel Hill. Here's a Wake Forest student there on the left named Arnold Palmer, a local Cadillac dealer. He had
He's rolling in. Go.
He had just won a silver tray being an amateur. He was still a student at Wake Forest at the Azalea Open Golf Tournament in Wilmington. Bob Toski in the middle there was the low pro, and he got money, but Arnold got a silver platter. and that's Anita Colby from Hollywood on the right. Here's another fair-grade ball player in the middle, Yogi, and that's Yogi's granddaughter, Lindsay Barrow, on the right, and Dean Richard Cole of the University Journalism School. Yogi knew that we had the best journalism school in the country, and he got Clyde King and then me and then Bill to help get Lindsay in at Chapel Hill, and she had a wonderful SAT score and extracurricular record, and now has a real good job with ESPN. But anyway, Yogi came down to visit her at Chapel Hill while she was there, and Clyde King invited Julia and me and some other folks out to dinner with him, and it was the dullest thing that you've ever seen. Nobody was speaking to, and I said, Clyde, you better tell some Yogi stories, and he could do that till midnight. And then Mrs. Barrow, Carmen, stood up, and she said, I want to tell one. Said, Joe Garagiola was coming out to see us. He got to town, and he phoned, and he said, Yogi, I'm at the Montclair Art Museum. Where do I go from here? And Yogi said, come this way. I don't know whether this local boy there, the small one, is here tonight or not, Jim Beatty. And the other boy there is Tom Burleson. Tommy Burleson was, of course, the center on the NC State National Championship basketball team, and Jim Beatty was the first person in the world to run the mile run in less than 4 minutes.
4 minutes, that's right.
So anyway, they're good friends, and they knew what I was up to when I asked them, could I take a picture of them together? But I think it's an amusing picture.
Look at that.
This little deer is less than 1 day old. And the reason I like this picture is because the sun is hitting those ears and backlighting it and making them look pink. But there's nothing cuter than a little fawn. And let me back up a minute here.
Don't run away from the turkeys.
I've seen male wild turkeys strutting for the benefit of a hen before, but I have never seen 4 of them marching abreast for the benefit of one little hen there that's obviously giving them the cold shoulder. But anyway, this is the only time I've ever seen this, and I don't ever expect to
See it again.
No.
Look at this picture, folks. Hummingbird.
If you want to take a picture of the ruby-throated hummingbird, you've got to have the light hitting his throat at the right angle. Otherwise, it turns out black. And if you don't take the thing at least 1,000th of a second, it doesn't stop the wing action. The 500th won't stop it. And of course, that Oswego tea blossom helps it a little bit. But I don't know how many rolls of film I went through to get this picture, and how many years it took me. But I'm glad to have all those elements together in one picture.
This is Mildred the Bear's daughter.
Mildred the Bear was the nicest bear that's ever been. She was the mascot of our mountain for 25 years, and I could have brought her in here tonight. She wouldn't have hurt anybody. She would have knocked over some dishes getting something to eat. But anyway, when cubs are born, they weigh about 10 ounces, and their eyes don't open for 40 days. And so mother has to pick them up to move them around, and she picks them up head first in her mouth. It looks terrible, it looks cruel, but it's really the most gentle thing you've ever seen. Well, those of you that are close enough to the screen can see that her right eye is looking straight ahead at me and the camera, and her left eye, Robert Hartley was with me, and he was about 5 feet over off to the side, and she's looking at Robert with the other eye. I didn't know that bears could do that. And I showed this picture to Dean Smith one time, and I said, "Don't you wish your ball players would do this?" He said, "I sure do."
Look at this.
This was this year's Cubs, 2 of them. You know, nationally, 1 out of every 100 is a brown-faced black bear cub. This year we had 3 cubs, and 2 of them were brown-faced, so we're beating the heck out of the odds, but I think they're really cute, and I thought maybe you'd like to see them. Now, here's another governor, and I was president of the first Azalea Festival in Wilmington back in 1948, and we were very honored that Governor R. Gregg Cherry would come down to crown the Azalea Queen, which was Jacqueline White, movie actress from RKO Radio Pictures. Governor Cherry was captain in a National Guard outfit called the Wilmington Light Infantry. He was a captain from Gastonia, and all the enlisted men were from Wilmington. So when Governor Cherry came down to Wilmington, he always had to have a drink with his men. And Governor Cherry did not drink with his men as a group. He drank with them one at a time.
Wait.
And if you will notice carefully, he's putting the crown on upside down.
This is a picture of Luther Hodges' birthplace. Hugh took this when he was press man for Governor Hodges, and he showed it to Mrs. Hodges. And she said, "For goodness sake, Hugh, tell everybody that it looked new when he lived in it." And he said, "Oh no, we're not out for social standing. Leave it like it is."
Oh, she jumped on me in a friendly way, said, "At least you should have said it was new when Luther lived in it." And, he said, "We're running for office. We're not running for social standing." But I don't think that Abraham Lincoln had a more humble beginning than Governor Hodges. And then, of course, he rose to be head of all 29 Marshall Fields of mills all over the world. And let me show you this picture. This is my favorite picture of him. You see that fishing fly in his cheek. He had a home right across the lake from where Julia and I live, and there was a knock on my door, and there was Governor Hodges saying, "Hugh, I want you to cut this fly out of my cheek." And I said, "Governor, I'm not going to give you a scar on your face and an infection. I'll drive you to the hospital and let the doctor do it." Well, while we were waiting for the doctor to show up, he said, "Go on and take a picture. I want to show it to my kids." But that's my favorite picture of Governor Hodges out of the many that I have. Here's another one when he was crowning the Azalea Queen, Deborah Paget, and Ronald Reagan was the master of ceremonies. This was back in the days that Mr. Reagan was working for the GE company, making speeches around the country, motivational speeches. And on that occasion, at a luncheon earlier that day
Next picture.
at the Cape Fear Country Club, I was privy to a conversation that I think was really significant. I asked the governor and Mr. Reagan, could I get a picture of him, and we went out on a covered porch there at Cape Fear Country Club, out of the hubbub that was in the center of the club. And Reagan said, "You were a big man in business, and now you're rendering public service. How is that?" Well, Governor Hodges gave him the most convincing speech that I have ever heard about the obligation of business people, successful business people, to render public service. And I really believe that it had an influence on him running the next year for governor of California and then eventually for president. But anyway, I just am convinced of that, Bill.
Yeah, moment of history. Take a good look, all you World War II people. That's the main deck of the USS North Carolina. You see all those red Japanese stars up, flags up there on the. That's Terry Sanford on the left and Admiral Arleigh Burch on the right. They're standing beneath twin mounts of what is known as a 40-millimeter anti-aircraft battery. The significance of this picture, though, is what Hugh did. He got 700,000 school children in this state to send nickels and dimes and quarters to the commission on the battleship, and he moved it from the docks in New Jersey down the East Coast to the Wilmington Harbor. Admiral Burke left 1 million gallons of oil in there to give ballast to move the ship to Wilmington. He knew all the time, though, that Hugh was going to sell it and get some money for it once he got it in dock. That battleship, of all the new battleships, was in every major engagement, the 12 encounters in the South Pacific. Most decorated vessel of all, the USS North Carolina. We're proud of her.
What makes me particularly proud of it is a memorial to the 10,000 people from North Carolina that died in World War II. And every one of those names is on the ship, county by county. It's the greatest World War II memorial, I think, in our country.
That's Jim Hunt and Carl Sagan. This was at the Emerging Issues Forum, which Governor Hunt generated, and it's now at North Carolina State annually, where great issues are discussed. But Mr. Sagan was there talking on the environment, and of course you all know he wrote the book Cosmos, which is a book everybody ought to have. But Julia tells me that after Hugh heard him speak, he went back and became North Carolina's #1 environmentalist. But if you go up to Grandfather, excuse me, Hugh, I want all of you to know that right there in that region is the only designated biosphere in the United States.
No, not
in the whole world. It's the whole world, though, you internationally designated.
Well, they own the privately owned one, yes.
Yes.
But Sagan's book, Cosmos, is still the
best book.
The best-selling book published, scientific book published in the English language. But he really made a terrific address that day. Governor Easley had just finished being photographed with some other people, and I turned to Ms. Easley and I said, "Can I get a picture of you with the governor?" And she snuggled up to him like you've never seen. It startled him. He didn't know what was going on. I think it really scared him. But anyway, that's my favorite picture of Governor and Ms. Easley. Dr. Billy Graham had been all over the world, made a big name for himself, but he hadn't preached to the home folks, and he decided that he would speak at the 1963 Singing on the Mountain at Grandfather Mountain. And you see Billy up on the big rock there and the mountain in the background. Well, just before Billy began speaking, the Highway Patrol said, "We don't want anybody to try to race home after this event because US 221, which goes by the singing grounds, is blocked from Marion to Blowing Rock, a distance of 55 miles. And there's never been such a crowd gathered in the mountains." Of course, this is a picture that we made out here when Billy and Franklin had the groundbreaking for their new headquarters here in Charlotte. This year, some of you are old enough to remember the swing band era. Boots Randolph had a record called Yakety Sax, and it sold 1 million copies. Well, this year, Boots has got a gospel album, and he came to this year's Singing on the Mountain back in June, and he played Closer Walk with Thee and Will the Circle Be Unbroken and all the old gospel favorites, and it was a big hit. Now, William?
You recognize that picture? That's Hugh and Felton Capel. That picture was taken in 2002. Of course, that evening they each received the University Award from the Board of Governors. The next year, that award went to Julia and Hugh Morton. Tomorrow night, that award will go to Governor Holzhauser. So we're seeing a piece of history here, the flow of recognizing people who really do great things to serve the state. Very proud of that picture, Hugh. Everybody knows this face. You know, everybody down here knew that he knew the Constitution like he knew the back of his hand. Most people in the country didn't. But the members of the United States Senate did, and they chose him, of course, and he was the man who led the famous Watergate hearings. Never a more colorful figure in North Carolina political life than Sam Ervin. Okay, you. Now.
Bill, this was this year's State Carolina game, and it had a very fine outcome. But the reason that I put this slide in here, you see the red over there, which is the state part of the stands, but there's red all over that stadium. And it means that the bitter rivalry that you hear about between State and Carolina, they all have good friends over at Chapel Hill, or they couldn't get those tickets scattered all through the stadium. I mean, I think that this rivalry business between State and Carolina is sort of a myth, don't you?
At least it sells out.
Yeah. All of you, I'm told, have one of our Charlie Justice statue brochures in your seat. And this is Coach Bunning holding one of them the other day. But we just dedicated that statue to Charlie here just a few days ago.
There it is.
This is not the statue. This is the clay model from which the casts were made to make the bronze statue. But this was over in the studio of John Paul Harris, the sculptor in Ashbar, and we took some of Charlie's classmates there to pass judgment on whether it really did look like Charlie. And left to right there is Joe Nykirk, the center on the Charlie Justice team, then two ends, Bob Cox and Art Weiner, and then on the right there, Walt Pupa, who was the fullback, and Joe Wright, who was a blocking back. But anyway, Walt Pupa, the stature is 1 1/2 life size, 8 feet 6 tall. Walt Pupa got on a step ladder and climbed up to look at the top part of the clay model, and he said, "I've got chills and goosebumps because I think I'm looking at Charlie face to face." And we thought that was about as good a testimony to John Paul's art as you could ask for. Here's the statue this past Friday, and there's his teammates who pulled the cover off of it, and they're all clapping and approving of the statue that's right outside of Kenan Stadium's football center. And I went to the basketball game last Friday night for the first half, and then I went over there to see it at night because I knew it had some fancy lighting around it. And here's the light, but all of you got to get by and see that statue because I think it's really a great job. And the brochure that you've got tells you that if you want to give as much as $100 towards the statue project, you can get a framing certificate that says that you're a Charlie Justice statue sculptor. So I hope some of you will take that to heart. And there's Mr. Spangler. He was in high school up in Virginia, and just a high school student. He saw the Carolina-Virginia football game, and the Virginians tore Charlie's jersey, and they threw it behind the bench, and Dick gave a cheerleader $10 to pick it up for him. He kept it for 50 years, and then when he was president of the university, he turned it over to the university, and it's in the football center. It's the key piece of memorabilia in there. I've got a lot of pictures of Dean Smith, but this is my favorite. And if you couldn't see that net around James Worthy's neck, you wouldn't know that they had won. This was right after they won the 1982 championship, and they were waiting to be interviewed by the national press. This is probably my most published picture of Michael. I know a lot of you remember C.J. Underwood had a program here on WBTV called Carolina Camera, and they wanted to take pictures of me under the basket, taking pictures at Carolina ball games. I saw Michael during the warm-up, and I told him that I would be there and that the television cameras were going to be firing away too. And so right after he made this basket, when he brushed by me on his way back up to the other end of the court, he said, "Was that good enough?"
You recognize this one? Still holds the record for most points scored. 3 times All-American, All-Pro rookie. I was in Rocky Mount when Phil graduated from high school. I spoke at his commencement there, and when he graduated at the university, I took part in that occasion. And then he decided to get married, and he sent me an invitation. So I went to the wedding, and when I saw him after the ceremony was over, I said, "Now, Phil, I was with you at high school, I was with you in the university, and here today, from here on, you're on your own." Tell the story about getting married, Hugh.
All right, well, I'll back it up here, and we'll do that. Phil's fiancée, Tracy, was from Durham, and she wanted to be married in Duke Chapel. And they applied and got turned down because they had no Duke connection. Well, Hugh Jr., my son, was one of Phil's buddies, and he called me and said, "Daddy, you know Governor Sanford, can you see if anything can be done?" Well, Sanford was no longer president of Duke. He was in the U.S. Senate. But I called him and told him the story, and he immediately said, "Hugh, you tell Phil Ford I am his Duke connection." And the next day, Phil got a call saying, "Mr. Ford, we'd be glad to have you married in Duke Chapel." But Tracy had 12 bridesmaids, which meant that Phil had to come up with 12 groomsmen. And I give you my word, it looked like the NBA All-Star team. You never saw such tall groomsmen in all your life.
Okay.
Bill, you want to talk about that one, or you want me to?
You go ahead. You got it.
Well, that's all 4 most recent head basketball coaches at the University of North Carolina. Left to right, Roy Williams, Dean Smith, Bill Guthridge, and Matt Doherty. That was at the Final Four in Indianapolis. And of course, Roy and Matt were Kansas, and Bill and Dean were North Carolina. And unfortunately, Kansas beat us. But I think that's, well, I'm pleased to have all 4 of those people in one picture like that.
Next.
Here is Julius Peppers, and I'm sorry he was offsides this past Sunday, but he played basketball at our place just for the fun of it. He knew that football was going to be his bread and butter, and this is when they were playing down in New Orleans at in the NCAA. But he had a good time, and he helped us a whole lot on the basketball court.
That's Betty Keenan on the left and Tom Keenan on the right. We wanted to have this picture in here because the Keenan Trust is, over the last period of years, has given the university as much as $100 million in endowment of one kind or another. But this is timely here because that same group decided that Hugh's book belonged in every senior high school in the state and every college library, and that job was done. They made the appropriation.
Bill, what it was it's in every public library, every high school library, every middle school library in the state. And don't think that I'm not grateful to the Keenans.
Part of that 30,000. Okay.
Florida people don't like our curves in the mountains, but Bill Hanna, the night watchman at Grandfather Mountain, and I had a good time taking this picture. I stayed at the camera and opened the shutter in this time exposure, and Bill Hanna drove my car up the mountain one time and down the mountain one time. The white lights are my headlights and the red lights are my tail lights. But anyway, that was a fun picture. When our folks were getting ready to go into Vietnam, the helicopter pilots down at Fort Bragg needed training landing and taking off at high elevation. You know, a helicopter doesn't operate as efficiently at high elevations where the air is thin, and they decided that our parking lot close to the swinging bridge was the ideal place. They could go in one side of the mountain and go out the other in case they overshot. And so we roped off the parking lot on a number of occasions to give them that training, and I'm told it helped them immensely.
Okay.
And here's the Highland Games hammer throw, and that's a really interesting part of the Highland Games. The National Geographic's going to run a feature on the 10 outstanding events in the country in their April edition, and the 50th anniversary of the Highland Games is going to be one of those events, and I'm going to send them that picture. Let me back it up here. This is the parking lot on top of Grandfather Mountain. That's Julia and my daughter Catherine and our dog. The temperature was 2 degrees above zero, Bill, but the wind was not blowing, and it really was pretty comfortable. But
Julia's cold that morning? 2 degrees above zero?
It really wasn't bad. In the distance, you can see Mount Mitchell in the distance there, and the Black Mountain Range, and I like that picture. Let me back it up again here. I went too fast. Louis Armstrong had a concert down in Wilmington, and there was a little 5-year-old boy, John Ponos, had a tiny little trumpet, and he was determined to show it to Louis. Louis, being the great humanitarian and showman that he was, he said, "Well, John, I think we ought to trade horns." And so you have never seen such a happy little 5-year-old in all your life. He's holding, Louis got his tiny trumpet, and John's holding Louis' gold-plated trumpet, and it was a fun occasion. Well, this next picture is Jane the bear at Grandfather Mountain, and she's teaching that cub to climb a tree. And Dr. Friday and I want every one of you to understand that he and I would have learned to climb a tree sooner than we did if we'd been given the same encouragement.
Friends, that's our journey with you. Thank you for listening.